Montana Territory, 1887. Bitter winds rake across the dusty rail town of Clearwater. The platform groaned beneath Jackson Reid's boots as the wind whipped down from the snow-bitten mountains, dragging dust and sorrow through the streets of Clearwater. The town looked half asleep, if it wasn't for the gray smoke curling from chimneys and the faded American flag snapping like a gunshot over the station house. A man might have thought the place dead. Jackson shifted his weight, the worn leather of his coat creaking, fingers curling around the letter in his pocket. Yellowed at the edges. Smudged ink. He'd read it a dozen times, and still, the words clung to him like a burr. Dear Mr. Reid, I come to you not out of desperation, but hope. Hope. That word didn't sit right in his chest. Hope had buried itself 6 feet under with his wife 3 winters ago, alongside the child that never drew breath. And yet, here he stood, waiting on a train he never wanted to meet, for a woman he never asked for. It was his sister-in-law Miriam who stirred this whole mess, talking circles round him, nagging in that soft, relentless way until finally she mailed off the damned application while he was in the barn mending fence posts. A man can't run a ranch and drown in grief, Jackson, she'd said. And you can't eat bitterness for supper. The whistle shrieked across the valley, pulling him back to the present. A thin column of smoke snaked along the horizon as the Northern Pacific engine rumbled into sight, wheels clattering over the iron rails. Snow flurries danced in the air, swirling like ghosts along the platform. Jackson flexed his jaw. His fingers toyed with the edge of his hat. The letter crackled in his pocket like a taunt. The train hissed to a halt. Doors slid open. Passengers spilled onto the platform. Businessmen in stiff coats. Mail clerks hefting bags. Weary settlers clutching children. All faces unfamiliar. All eyes eager or indifferent. And then he saw her, a slight figure in a pale blue dress, creased from travel but clean, a simple wool coat hugging her slender frame, auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a bonnet. She stepped down, gloved hand trembling ever so slightly as her boots touched Clearwater soil. Their eyes met, and he froze, not because she was striking, though there was a quiet beauty to her, but because of the tear glistening on her cheek. It wasn't the wild sob of regret, nor the nervous dew of uncertainty. It was something quieter, grief, a grief he recognized, one that made a man fold in on himself, but stand taller all the same. Eleanor Prescott, the name from the letter, the woman he hadn't wanted, hadn't planned for, standing there with sorrow in her eyes and defiance in her spine. Jackson cleared his throat, stepping forward as the last of the passengers trickled past. Miss Prescott. The words felt stiff, foreign, like boots that didn't fit. She nodded, swallowing hard, voice soft but steady. Mr. Reid, I presume. A gust of wind tugged her bonnet ribbon loose, and she caught it with a small, graceful motion. Her eyes flicked over him, taking stock, measuring him. Her gaze lingered on the worn edges of his coat, the calluses on his hands, the shadows carved beneath his eyes. I expected someone older, she admitted quietly. Jackson snorted, an almost smile threatening. I expected nobody. Her lips parted in surprise, but the moment shattered as a voice barked from behind. Well, well, ain't that sweet? Another mail order bride off the train. A tall, broad-shouldered man leaned against the rail post, a wolfish grin splitting his weathered face. His companions chuckled low, spit hitting the wooden planks as they eyed Eleanor like she was livestock. Folks really desperate up in these parts, the man added, nudging his friend. Jackson's jaw tightened. His fingers twitched at his belt. He hadn't come here spoiling for trouble, but damned if he'd let anyone talk about her like that. With slow, deliberate steps, he closed the space between them. You run that mouth of yours one more time, Jackson drawled, voice low as a winter storm, and I'll give you something to chew on for the next month." The man's smirk faltered. His eyes drifted to the Colt at Jackson's hip, the worn handle well used. After a tense beat, he held up his hands, backing off. "Easy there, cowboy. Just having fun. Find your fun elsewhere." The men shuffled off, muttering. Jackson turned back to Eleanor, her eyes wide not with fear, but something closer to reluctant gratitude. Neither of them spoke as he took her carpet bag from the platform and led her toward the waiting wagon. The mule pawed the ground impatiently, the approaching storm pressing down like a warning. The ride out of town was quiet. Snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, blanketing the scrubland in pale silence. Pines hunched beneath the weight, the skeletal outline of Bitterroot Mountains looming beyond. Eleanor sat beside him, gloved hands folded neatly in her lap, posture composed, but eyes drifting, watching the vast, empty land stretch endlessly ahead. Jackson could feel the questions brimming between them, unsaid yet thick as molasses. Finally, she spoke, voice gentle but tinged with steel. "I understand you didn't request me, Mr. Reid." He kept his eyes forward, fingers tightening on the reins. "That's right." A pause. Snowflakes clung to her lashes like tiny stars. "And yet, you came to the station." Jackson exhaled slowly, breath fogging in the cold. The mule's hooves crunched over the frozen trail. "My sister-in-law's got a way of making things difficult to ignore." He cast her a sidelong glance. "Figured if you were fool enough to cross 1,000 miles of snow and prairie for a stranger, least I could do was meet you proper." Eleanor's lips curled faintly. Not a smile. Something wearier. Something that understood loneliness all too well. "You suppose I'm a fool, then?" He shrugged. "Suppose we both might be." The ranch came into view. A modest spread nestled at the foot of a low ridge, smoke curling from the chimney, fences weathered but standing. The barn leaned slightly to the left, one shutter hanging loose. It wasn't much, but it was his. As they pulled up, the clouds darkened, promising a storm. Jackson hopped down, grabbing her bag. He paused, studying her for a moment longer. "I never promised nothin', Miss Prescott," he warned, voice quiet. "This arrangement, it ain't what folks dream up in stories." Eleanor met his gaze, straight-backed and steady. "Stories are for people with the luxury of dreaming, Mr. Reid. I'm here for reality." A beat passed, and for the first time in years, a flicker of something almost like respect kindled beneath his ribs. The wind howled over the ridge as they stepped toward the house, the storm closing in behind them. The storm came heavy that night. Thick curtains of snow swept across the valley, smothering the landscape beneath a mantle of white. Wind clawed at the windows of Jackson Reid's modest ranch house, whistling through the chinks in the wood like a warning whispered by the land itself. Inside, the fire popped and cracked, throwing faint orange light across the walls. It was a small space, one main room, a narrow kitchen tucked off the side, sleeping quarters above. Sparse, practical, every inch worn by time and use. Eleanor Prescott stood by the hearth, her slender hands wrapped around a chipped enamel mug. The faintest tremor lingered in her fingers, though whether from cold or nerves, Jackson couldn't tell. Neither had spoken much since arriving. Silence was easier, safer. Jackson dragged another log onto the fire, watching the embers scatter upward like fleeting stars. "Storm will have us buried in by morning," he muttered, half to himself. Eleanor's gaze flicked to the frosted window, lips pressing into a thin line. "Does it happen often? Snow this heavy? In these mountains?" Jackson's voice was dry. "Every damn year." A quiet settled between them, filled only by the hiss of wind and the creak of old timber. Jackson busied himself with the stove, heating leftover stew. Eleanor sat near the fire, shoulders drawn tight, her eyes lingering on the flames like they held all the answers she'd been searching for. The stew simmered. The storm howled. They ate in silence. Days bled into one another, the storm refusing to let up. Snow drifted halfway up the barn door. The animals huddled together in the stable, breath steaming in the frigid air. It was a daily ritual now, chopping wood, hauling feed, breaking ice from the troughs. Eleanor surprised him. She didn't flinch at the cold or complain about the work. She rolled up her sleeves, gathered eggs, shoveled snow. Her cheeks flushed pink from the bitter wind. There was resolve there, beneath the delicate frame, beneath the fine Eastern manners, like tempered steel hidden beneath silk. Jackson watched her from the shadows of his own grief. Walls still firmly in place, but even stone cracks with enough weather. It was on the third evening, as the fire sputtered low and shadows danced along the walls, that Eleanor spoke of her past. She wasn't looking at him when the words fell from her lips. Her eyes stayed on the flickering flames, voice low but steady. "My father is a wealthy man. In Boston." Jackson arched a brow, saying nothing. "He arranged for me to marry a business partner, a man 3 times my age." She hesitated, the mug trembling faintly in her hands. "I refused. He didn't take kindly to defiance. Said I'd bring shame to the family name." Jackson's jaw tensed. He'd seen his share of proud men who'd trade a daughter's will for reputation. "So, I answered the advertisement," she continued, lips quirking with dry amusement. "Perhaps. I thought the West would be my punishment. Or salvation." A pause. "Did you find either yet?" Jackson asked, voice rough as gravel. Eleanor's gaze finally lifted to his, the firelight catching in her eyes. "I suppose that depends on whether I stay." The room seemed to shrink. The storm groaned beyond the walls. And for the first time, Jackson wasn't sure if the tension in his chest was from grief or something else entirely. Before he could speak, the dogs outside barked. Low, warning howls that sent a ripple of unease through him. His hand went to the rifle propped by the door. A sharp knock sounded. 3 short raps. Deliberate, unafraid. Jackson cracked the door, barrel raised. A figure stood in the snow, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a buffalo hide coat. Dark hair dusted with snow, sharp eyes the color of slate. "Tobias Black Elk," the man announced simply, lifting a hand. "Storm caught me coming down from Bitterroot Pass. Thought maybe you had room near your fire." Jackson's eyes narrowed, weighing the stranger. Half Lakota, by the look of him. Scar along the cheekbone, the worn tools of a trapper at his belt. Trust didn't come easy in these parts, but neither did surviving winter. Jackson lowered the rifle slightly. "Come in, then." Tobias stepped inside, shedding snow like a ghost from the wilderness. His eyes drifted briefly to Eleanor, unreadable, then back to Jackson. Eleanor's posture stiffened, but she held her ground. The trapper said little, warming himself by the fire, sharp gaze drifting between them, observing, assessing. There was something coiled beneath his quiet, like a wolf resting but alert. For days, the 3 of them shared that small space. The storm raged outside, but inside uneasy peace took root. Tobias proved himself capable. He helped mend the barn roof where the wind had torn shingles loose. Showed Eleanor how to snare rabbits along the treeline. His words were sparse, but his hands spoke of experience, of surviving the harshness this land offered without apology. Still, not everyone was welcoming. Jackson rode to Clearwater 2 days after the storm eased enough to pass. The town buzzed with whispers. Bandits had hit 2 ranches north of town. Horses stolen. Barns torched. A rancher shot in the leg for defending his property. Settlers muttered about foreigners and half-breeds, bringing bad luck. Jackson could feel the suspicion prickling beneath their words. See the wary glances, when he mentioned Tobias sheltering at his place. He felt the tension coil tighter when a grizzled farmer spat tobacco in the dirt and sneered, "You lettin' them types near your woman, Reid? Or is she just another fool like the rest, runnin' from something?" The words landed heavier than Jackson expected. He turned, slow and deliberate, meeting the man's gaze with ice in his veins. "She's got more grit than half the men in this town," Jackson replied coldly. "And my affairs ain't your concern." The man muttered, retreating, but the unease lingered. At home, the snow still blanketed the ranch, but inside, cracks formed in the walls around Jackson's heart. Small things. Eleanor stitching the tear in his old coat, delicate fingers surprisingly deft. Jackson brushing snow from her shoulders after chores, their eyes lingering too long by firelight. Sparks, buried under ash and fear. Neither dared name it yet, but it simmered quiet, steady, as the snow piled higher and the days grew shorter. One night, as Jackson tended the animals, Eleanor approached, her cheeks pink from cold, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Do you regret it?" she asked. He straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Regret what?" "Letting me stay." Jackson studied her, the way the wind teased loose strands of her hair, the way her shoulders squared despite the nerves. A long pause. "No," he admitted, voice rough. "I regret not wanting to hope sooner." Eleanor's breath caught, faint as snowfall. Before anything more could be said, the distant crack of a rifle echoed across the hills. Tobias appeared from the shadows, eyes sharp, face grim. "Trouble's close," he warned simply. The storm outside had quieted, but the real one was yet to come. The crack of the rifle still echoed faintly in the hills when Tobias Black Elk returned to the cabin. Snow drifted like smoke across the yard. The storm had passed, but the bitter cold clung to the land like a second skin. A silence hung in the air, taut, uneasy. "They're coming," Tobias said simply, his sharp eyes scanning the treeline. "For men. Maybe more." Jackson Reid tightened his grip on the rifle, the old bitterness in his chest giving way to something sharper. Purpose. Bandits. Eleanor's voice was steady, though her fingers trembled as she clutched her coat closed. Tobias nodded. "The same ones hit the ranches north of here. They know your place is isolated." Jackson's jaw flexed. His ranch wasn't much, a sagging barn, weather-beaten fences, but it was all he had left, all that anchored him after years of loss, regret, and the quiet flicker of something new. His gaze drifted to Eleanor, her pale face framed by loose strands of auburn hair, eyes wide but determined. He hadn't wanted this. A mail-order bride. A complication. But fate didn't ask permission. The wind shifted. Distant hoofbeats rumbled like thunder over the frozen ground. "They'll be here soon," Tobias added. "We can't fight them head-on. Not here." Jackson's mind raced. He'd fought men before on muddy battlefields, in dark alleyways, but not like this. Not with something worth protecting. "We'll lead them to Bitter Creek," Jackson decided, voice low. "Use the ridges, the gulch. Make 'em fight where they can't outnumber us." Tobias's lips twitched with faint approval. "Smart. I'll guide you." Jackson turned to Eleanor, hesitation flickering in his chest. "Stay here. Bar the doors. If they get past us." No, her voice was soft, but unyielding. "I'm not hiding while you bleed for me." For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other. Snowflakes spiraled between them. The old walls, grief, pride, fear, crumbled just a little more. "Then stay close," Jackson relented, handing her the spare rifle. "And don't hesitate." They moved quickly, saddling the mule, gathering ammunition. The sky bruised to a deep gray as twilight fell, long shadows stretching across the snow-blanketed valley. By the time the bandits arrived, the ranch appeared abandoned. The narrow trail to Bitter Creek wound through a gulch flanked by jagged ridges, snow crunching beneath their boots as they took cover behind boulders and trees. The frozen creek snaked through the valley floor, its banks veiled in mist. The bandits rode in, 6 of them. Rough men with unshaven faces, rifles slung low, eyes sharp with greed. Their leader, a broad-shouldered brute with a scar running down his cheek, scanned the terrain with suspicion. "Place is quiet," the leader muttered. "Too quiet." But greed dulls caution. They pressed on. Tobias crouched beside Jackson atop the ridge, bow in hand, eyes narrowed. "First 2, I'll take them," Tobias whispered. "You and Eleanor handle the rest." Jackson nodded, forcing the old grief, the hesitation, down into the pit of his stomach. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about fighting for what he couldn't bear to lose again. The first arrow flew, silent, swift, striking the nearest bandit clean through the throat. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked across the frozen valley as the remaining bandits scrambled for cover, their leader barking orders. Jackson's rifle bucked against his shoulder, the first shot catching a rider in the chest, knocking him clean off his horse. Tobias melted into the trees, a ghost among the snow. The leader's eyes darted wild. "Find them. Flush 'em out." Jackson reloaded, sweat freezing on his brow despite the cold. His heart hammered, not from fear, but from the weight of everything unspoken between him and the woman huddled beside him, breath sharp, rifle gripped in trembling hands. Another bandit advanced along the creek bed, shotgun raised. Eleanor's shot cracked through the dusk. The man stumbled, cursing, his weapon falling into the snow as blood bloomed across his coat. Jackson blinked, startled, but pride simmered beneath the shock. They fought as a unit, shifting positions, laying traps along the gulch. Tobias's arrows found their mark, silent and deadly. Jackson's rifle barked steady, controlled. Eleanor, fierce despite the fear in her eyes, watched his back without question. But the leader was cunning. A gunshot rang out. Too close. Pain seared across Jackson's side as he stumbled behind cover, crimson staining the snow. The scarred leader approached, gun raised, a twisted grin curling his lips. "Well now, ain't this poetic? Man tries to play hero, ends up bleedin' in the snow for some mail-order bride." Jackson's vision blurred, the world spinning, but Eleanor's voice cut through the haze. "Step away from him." The bandit turned, sneer faltering, as Eleanor leveled the rifle at his chest, her eyes cold as the mountains. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The leader lunged, too slow. Eleanor fired. The shot echoed, sharp as thunder. The bandit collapsed, crimson staining the pristine snow. Silence fell. By the time the last of the bandits fled, Bitter Creek lay littered with bodies, the snow marred by blood and broken tracks. Tobias emerged from the trees, face unreadable, bow in hand. Jackson groaned as Eleanor pressed a cloth to his wound, her touch gentle but firm. "You all right?" she whispered, eyes shining with unspoken fear and something more. "Nothing I can't handle," Jackson rasped, managing a faint, crooked smile. "Remind me not to argue with you again." Her lips twitched, the tension easing. They limped back to the ranch, bruised, bloodied, but standing. The barn was scorched where one of the bandits had tried to set it alight, but the house stood untouched. The animals stirred nervously in the stable. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Home, battered, but not broken. Later, as Tobias saddled his horse, ready to vanish back into the wilderness, Jackson approached. "You didn't have to help," Jackson remarked quietly. Tobias shrugged, adjusting his quiver. "Storms bring strange company. Sometimes worth keepin'." Jackson extended a hand. Tobias hesitated, then shook it, firm and brief. Your woman's got more fire than you deserve, Tobias added with a wry grin, mounting his horse. Jackson chuckled. Ain't that the truth? With a final nod, Tobias rode off into the pines, a silent shadow, swallowed by the trees. The sun bled orange along the ridgeline as Jackson and Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the snow fall soft and steady. She leaned against the post, arms crossed, eyes searching his face. "You never wanted a mail-order bride," she said softly. Jackson exhaled, gaze lingering on her. The set of her jaw, the curve of her smile, the quiet strength she carried like armor. "No," he admitted, voice low and certain. "But I reckon fate don't ask permission." A long pause. "I can leave if that's what you want," Eleanor offered, though her voice trembled on the last word. Jackson stepped closer, hand brushing her cheek, the walls around his heart finally, irrevocably breaking. "I want you to stay," he whispered. "Not 'cause you have to, but 'cause maybe we both deserve a second chance." For the first time, the fear in her eyes softened, replaced by cautious hope. They stood there, beneath the wide Montana sky, as the snow fell and the world, battered and bruised, kept turning. In the harsh lands of the frontier, love seldom arrives in tidy packages or planned invitations. It comes like a storm, fierce, unexpected, and leaving scars in its wake. But sometimes it's the storms that teach hearts to hope again. Beat. If you believe in stories where broken souls find strength, where fate doesn't ask permission, but hope takes root, like, comment, and subscribe. Because out here, beginnings are seldom easy, but they're always worth telling.